You may be getting enough of a particular nutrient to meet all your needs, and yet it would be beneficial in a few cases to have more, because having an excess can actually provide lots of benefits for your body. In the mainstream, they're treated as, it's fine, you'll get enough for your diet. But it's actually very, very easy, even for a person with a normal requirement, might not be getting an optimal amount from their diet. And so once you start needing 2 or 3 times as much, it's very easy to not be getting enough from the diet. Literally, you lose any sense of conscience, any guilt, shame, most fear, become highly impulsive, highly predatory. All that stuff can happen just as a result of excess copper.
Hi, and welcome to the Rejuvenate Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are continuing the conversation of the most overlooked and underrated essential nutrients. So, Elwin, tell me, why did we want to carry on this conversation? Because I know we had a few previously, but you've got more in that treasure chest of yours, don't you?
Yeah, well, it was quite popular last time. And, this is all about nutrients. We've done, different things like peptides and hormones before. And the thing that defines a nutrient to me is not, that it's in food or that it's in a supplement necessarily. It's something that exists in your body. And then, so there's essential nutrients, which means it exists in your body and you must get it from the outside. Literally, you will die. You won't survive without it. And then there's conditionally essential nutrients, which means in some cases you have to get it from the outside. And then there's non-essential nutrients, which means that your body can make plenty of its own in theory, but it's still a nutrient. So to give an example, like all the amino acids, would be in the category of nutrients because they exist in the body, whereas, like bioflavonoids or resveratrol or berberine, as much as these could be really great plant compounds, these are not something that exists naturally inside your body. It's not something that your body would naturally make. It's not a building block of your body, and that's what I like to call it. Nutrients are building blocks. So what I always say about nutrients or building blocks is you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And so when it comes to the building blocks that you are literally built out of, that you're made out of, you could be doing everything right and you could be just low on something that you haven't even heard of. And that's the thing that's completely undermining you and undoing all your other hard work. I suspect if you're watching, a long podcast like this, you're probably doing way more for your health than the average person, and yet maybe you're still struggling. And so not always, but often it can be that you're just missing a few of these, essential or maybe essential to you, that you get more building blocks, which can literally make all the difference to your health. And of course, we're the Rejuvenate podcast. And so we're all about helping people to, overcome premature aging and feel as young as possible. And so I've also, all these nutrients I've selected, I believe, and in my experience, they fall into that category. They help you feel younger.
And when you say, like, if somebody is lacking that particular building block, would it be the same as like a rate limiting factor, or they can only go so far because they don't have it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I meant kind of by the weakest link thing. Yeah. So the idea, with that metaphor is literally the amount that you pull on it, like it will only resist whatever so absolutely rate limiting is another way of looking at it. And then there is another factor as well, which is you may be getting enough of a particular nutrient to meet all your needs, and yet it would be beneficial in a few cases to have more, because having an excess can actually provide lots of benefits for your body. That's certainly not true for all the nutrients. Some of the nutrients, it's a real issue. If you have an excess, it's a really bad thing. And we've talked about that previously, like in the case of iron and copper and zinc, for instance. But in some cases, having like significantly more than you need can actually be a benefit. The other thing is, I'll try and get this right, but I might occasionally say the wrong thing. There is a difference between a deficiency as defined medically and a suboptimal amount, which is more what I will be talking about. In fact, that's what I'll probably be referring to exclusively, as I'm not a doctor. I'll be talking about an amount that is not, I might be talking about you not having enough, meaning it's an amount that prevents you from being at your very best, rather than saying you'll have so little of it that it's causing a medical condition. However, of course, with probably most, if not all, the nutrients I'm talking about today, it is possible to have a medical condition because you have so little of it, but it's usually pretty rare. It's usually more that you might want to have more in order to optimize.
Fantastic. Well, let's get started. Let's kick this off.
Lysine. I love lysine because it's immune system supportive. And I say that's the main thing that it's known for. It's also known for, helping with collagen production, it's helping the central nervous system, it's helping the digestive system, all the amino acids, especially the essential amino acids. And lysine is one of the 8 or 9 essential amino acids that's defined, have loads and loads and loads of different benefits, but they tend to have, one or two things that they are especially important for and especially known for. And with lysine, it's the immune system, and it's especially supporting the immune system with viruses. And so the most famous example of this that a lot of people have heard of, and I suspect the main reason that lysine is bought as an amino acid, is to do with herpes. So herpes is obviously a virus.
How does that help specifically with viruses, lysine? What is it doing?
I don't believe that is fully understood. It's certainly not, like something like copper where it actually kills them on contacts. It's certainly not something like that. It is absolutely a building block of the peptides that nourish the immune system. It's, a building block of some constituents of the immune system. But it doesn't seem to be, that much more of a building block than anything else, like, glutamic acid or something like that, not like other important amino acids. So my theory on this is, in relation to what you said earlier, that it's actually a rate-limiting amino acid, that it's not necessarily that it's more important for the immune system than many other amino acids, but it's the one that we tend to be most efficient in. Now, this flies in the face of the mainstream understanding. I mean, I just did, a little search before this. I always like to see what the mainstream's saying about things. And the mainstream perspective is that lysine deficiency is rare. But again, that's by their medical definition, right? I'm sure it is rare that you're so low in it that that would be classed as a medical condition. But I wonder, how many times things that ultimately lead to serious medical conditions start off with just simple building block deficiencies, which over time just create more and more problems. And so I see lysine as essential for the immune system for that reason. It's also essential for the hormonal system. But I personally, in my amino acid tests, have seen frequently low lysine, but I've actually seen it in loads of other people's as well. Lysine along with tyrosine seems to be the 2 amino acids that people are most commonly low in.
Why do you think that is?
Well, we are certainly under attack by stress.
Yeah, that's true.
As we've talked about many times before, even though in many ways our lives, objectively, you could say, are actually less stressful because of the access to media we have and all the rest of it, we are able to be stressed 24/7. And so... And just really so naturally, that is stressful for the body, even if in many ways it's easier for us. And so tyrosine is the building block for dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline. It's also the building block for thyroxine, which is something that generally you tend to have an issue with when you have an issue of stress. So I think that's the reason for tyrosine. I think for lysine, it's probably similar, but there may be a nutritional element to it as well. So I mentioned that lysine is one of the 8 essential amino acids. So it's one of the ones specifically that is quite hard to get enough of without animal food. The way they often say that, animal foods contain complete protein and then plant foods contain kind of incomplete protein. And this is kind of, obviously argued about and debated by people who prefer a plant-based diet. But I think they say, like, it doesn't matter. Your body stores amino acids, which is true. And so long as you get a variety of different vegan or plant-based sources of protein, you do get all the amino acids, which is also true in many cases. But nonetheless, like, there are actually a lot of plant foods which their protein is pretty low in lysine. The invention or ability to easily synthesize lysine from corn was a big breakthrough in the whole livestock industry, because they like to fatten up animals as cheaply as possible, and so they would have loved it if they could feed them just corn. But the problem is corn is very low in lysine, which is one of the essential amino acids, and so the animals just wouldn't grow properly without it. And so they had to pay more money to give them a more varied diet. As soon as they synthesized lysine, they were able to give them just corn and lysine, and then they had everything they needed for the animals to grow. So that shows like the an example of where a plant-based diet just wasn't sufficient without adding more. I had a plant-based diet for a long time, and many of my clients have done. Often they aren't when I see their results, but they have been for a long time before. Sometimes they are. I certainly have some vegans as clients. And it may be because of that plant-based diet that they've ended up deficient in lysine. That may be why I see that trend, and it may not be true for the general population. I also don't know that for sure. Mm-hmm. I would also say, just as like the excess of stress in our diet, in our lives probably means we need more tyrosine from our diet to give our body the building block to maintain that level of stress. I think the onslaught of new microbes and pathogenic organisms that we're exposed to in this modern day is way higher than it used to be. If you think about it, we talked about this before, up until very recently, the vast majority of people would, be born, live and die in, within 10-mile radius of the same place. They very rarely meet anyone new. At the moment, we're constantly exposed to organisms and pathogens from all over the road, right? There's airplanes constantly going here, there, and everywhere. Maybe we're actually traveling all over the world quite frequently, flying between different places. We're in buildings regularly with thousands of people, and not people who, we spent a whole life with, like a tribe, like we used to have, but people, we never met and will never see again, all that kind of stuff. So I think our immune system is being bombarded. Then there's the element of our organisms, especially viruses, being created on purpose. There is a whole kind of school of thought on that. I think the obvious answer is definitely yes. Other than that, I don't think anyone who's looked into it would deny it. How much of that has an impact on us is probably the bit that would be highly contested. But that's another potential factor. And then we have to remember that our immune system is not only there to fend off the invading hordes, as it were. A lot of the job of the immune system is like a waste disposal, as much as it is like border patrol or, army. It's as much, garbage collection. And so we're also being inundated by all of these toxins that we weren't before. So these are all my theories as to why. I've left it a bit open because, as I say, I don't know. It may just be the kind of person that I see as a client who is very commonly lysine deficient. But even then, if you're watching this, you're probably that kind of person, so it'll still apply to you.
Okay. And so what's the best form of lysine?
Well, food-based would be better. And so basically all of the animal forms, dairy, meat, egg, fish, all of that kind of stuff would all be high in lysine. I believe it's the beans which are also quite high in lysine. Most of the other plant forms aren't, but I didn't look that up beforehand, so someone can fact check me if I'm wrong in the comments. But yeah, mainly animal proteins. Of course, you can supplement with it, and I do both. And despite doing both, I still get lab reports back telling me that I'm deficient in lysine.
Could there be a genetic factor for that deficiency?
Absolutely, yes. And yeah, I didn't mention that, but thank you for adding that. Yeah, that's always a factor for all the nutrients that I ever talk about. And, in our nutrition collection for Genetic Insights, literally we have a report on every single essential and a lot of conditionally essential nutrients, every essential amino acid, every essential fat, every vitamin, every mineral, every single thing that is a genetic factor that might predispose you to needing more. And in fact, also in some cases needing less of that nutrient. And so that may well be it for me as well. I don't think that it is in my genes though, but I have seen it. I would say I've seen a increased lysine need in the genetic reports I've seen in people more commonly than average. But I haven't seen it like super commonly, which is why it's not my go-to explanation. But it absolutely could be. You're absolutely right.
And what kind of dose would somebody be looking to take?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the doses that you can take, so people who have like an active viral infection, especially herpes, often do take a lot. They might take 5 grams a day, 10 grams a day. I have not seen any studies showing that there's a toxicity to excess lysine other than the obvious toxicity of excess protein in general, which is another very contested subject, depending on what kind of foods people believe are beneficial. But even though some people say 50 grams of protein a day is enough, some people say 200 grams a day is much better, right? I think even the people who say 50 grams a day is better probably wouldn't think that 200 grams a day is a severe problem, right? That it's dangerous. They might just say it's not ideal. So my point being, you can have a lot of lysine without it being an issue. Now, I wouldn't say that of tyrosine, for instance, another amino acid I've talked about. You can overdo it with tyrosine and overstimulate yourself. Lysine, I have not seen anything like that, where if you take too much, then it has this negative impact.
I was going to ask a safety concern. So is there something is there a level that is too much, or is this pretty safe?
As I said, not that I know of, in comparison to any other protein. Like, you can have too much protein in general, but I haven't seen anything, no.
Okay, great. So essentially, this is really looking after the immune system. And if somebody is suffering with a high viral load, what I'm hearing is this could be potentially something that's good to supplement with.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Creatine, did I say that right? So with creatine, is that just for muscles, or is there something else we need this for?
Yeah, creatine is actually on my list of underrated nutrients, but it's underrated by a specific population, which is people who want mental clarity and people who want to support detoxification, which are actually the reasons that I take it. So I'll just explain. So creatine is an amino acid. It's not considered essential because your body actually definitely does make it itself out of other amino acids from your diet. However, it's the reason why I like to supplement it is different for most people. Most people use it to support exercise and muscle, and it is actually the most researched supplement in the world. And the vast majority of research is for that purpose. So, I think the most classic thing might be, men who want bigger muscles, and there is some support for this. We're not sure. I've seen contested perspectives on this, on whether it is truly increasing like the amount of muscle fibers or the density of the tissue, or whether it's just adding water to it. But either way, having muscles that are well hydrated is no bad thing. So in either way, you could say, it ends up the same thing. It can lead to bigger muscles. It absolutely, increases endurance. It's very supportive for exercise. It's part of the whole synthesis of ATP thing that we've talked about in detail before. It can support that whole process. ATP is cellular energy, which is beneficial for absolutely everything, every system in the body, every cell, every organ. So, there's that benefit. It has been shown to increase DHT, which is something that we've talked about before as being something beneficial.
Yeah. Yep. We talked about that before in a previous episode, right?
Yes, for men. But I have not seen anything to say that it does that for women, so that's okay. It's just that it can help men to do something they want to do, but that doesn't mean it will do the same thing to women. But the reason why I like it, and the reason why I'd recommend you, if you're a non-sports exercise bodybuilder person, should consider it, is because of how much it helps the whole process of methylation in the body. So methylation is something that a lot of people have heard of these days.
Yeah, I was going to say, could you give us, just because we're here, a quick brief overview of why methylation is important?
Yeah, so the simplest way of describing this is simply, it's your body's way of transforming one thing into another thing. By adding or taking away methyl groups, your body can make these transformations. So this could be, turning one neurotransmitter into another, like dopamine into noradrenaline, which will affect how you feel and, how your body is performing and what it's prioritizing and all the rest of it. But it could be taking something toxic and turning it into something less toxic, or taking something toxic and preparing it for being removed from the body. And it could be, creating things that you actually need out of building blocks, out of raw material. So, that's methylation. That's a simple version of methylation in a nutshell. But here's the interesting thing. The majority of the work, let's say, that goes into methylation by the body actually goes into creating two things, creatine and choline, which we'll probably talk about later. So, and I believe that creatine in most cases, if not all cases, is actually number one. So the number one thing that your body uses all this methylation capacity for is creating creatine. So even though it is something that your body can create itself just fine, right, by any normal standard, by any mainstream perspective, it is something that requires a lot of your body's capacity, which it maybe could be better off using for something else if it weren't busy creating creatine, right? It's a bit like, when I used to help entrepreneurs and stuff like that, I would say, look, there's nothing wrong with, cooking and cleaning and stuff like that. It's great, but if you're trying to build this business, you may be better off hiring someone else to do that so you can focus on building your business for a while, right? So it's something like that. There's nothing wrong with your body using methylation to create creatine, but if you give it a break from that by giving it an abundance of creatine, it can focus on all the other jobs that it's maybe put on the back burner or other jobs that may be more important for it. And especially if you have an issue with methylation, and I know a lot of people do these days, they're quite focused on that, then the common advice that I see everyone give is, give B2, B3, B6, B9, B12. Maybe sometimes they recommend trimethylglycine, which is a methyl donor. It's just got lots of kind of spare methyl groups that your body can use. But I actually think that not better because you do need those B vitamins, absolutely. But let's say a bigger impact can be gained by giving your body plenty of creatine. And plenty of creatine for this purpose is not that much necessarily compared to what you see sports people and bodybuilder types taking. Now, the reason why I like to take it very specifically is two reasons. First of all, because I have that COMT gene that means that I break down stress chemicals slowly. So the more methyl donors I have, the less that's going to be an issue for me. The more that my body can break down stress chemicals quickly. And the other reason is I have this backlog of toxicity that my body's still dealing with for various reasons, which I talked about in previous episodes. And so giving my body a break from making creatine means there's more methylation capacity available to deal with that backlog potentially as well.
That makes absolute sense. So let me ask you this. Are there different forms of creatine or, is there a better form to take?
There are different types. I've used like a creatine bonded to magnesium because, often a mineral like magnesium will be bonded to amino acid to make it more easily absorbable. This makes sense to me because both, magnesium and creatine really support ATP. So it makes sense to take them together. And most people need magnesium. We talked about that before. However, I think it was like 3 or 4 times the price as the regular type, which is creatine monohydrate. And I have not seen any evidence that it's really better, other than the fact that it's also giving your body a nice dose of magnesium. So I would say, assuming that creatine monohydrate is the by far cheaper version that you have available to you, and there's no really strong reason not to use that, I would recommend that in most cases.
And so you talked about the potential dosings for somebody that's using it to gain muscle, things like that. And what would we be talking about here for somebody?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the kind of sports bodybuilding kind of attitude, I think, is to take like a loading dose. So as much as 20 grams for a period of time, say a week, and then you go down to 5 grams a day on an ongoing basis. That is the kind of amount that you're going to want to take if you're trying to like force a bit more muscle mass onto you or the appearance of muscle mass. It's absolutely not necessary with what we're talking about, and possibly not even beneficial for highly sensitive people who are quite aware of their methylation process, because it can quite a big swing in what's going on in that regard. And so basically, I would say like a gram a day is plenty for someone who is not doing intense exercise, is not interested in building muscle, who simply wants, to think clearer, support detoxification, reduce stress, those kind of things I was talking about. A gram a day, even 500 milligrams a day is still quite a lot. So obviously now I'm talking about a supplement, but the other option, if you want to get it from food, I'll try and remember to do that in all cases with nutrients. Creatine is mainly found in muscle, and so creatine is really found in muscle meat specifically. I guess heart will be another thing, but other than that, it's muscle. It's an animal's muscle. And so if you're happy to eat meat, that's no big deal. But yeah, when looking into it, even when you eat a lot of meat, like, several hundred grams a day of meat, then you still are getting less than a gram of creatine from there. It's not that much. So
Wow. Okay. I'm surprised by that, but okay, then I understand now why supplementing would be very, very beneficial.
yes, yeah. I mean, look, the amount you're getting from a animal muscle-based diet compared to a non-animal muscle-based diet is way, way more. You're basically gonna get, pretty much done otherwise, but it's still not much compared to supplementing.
Okay. And then with this one, as we always do with creatine, are there any safety concerns?
Yes, there are some documented. If you have various issues like maybe kidney disease, then it can be an issue. But again, from what I've seen, that tends to be in the higher doses. So medically, it tends to be more, if you're having a lot, or if you have pre-existing medical conditions, in which case, you should always run new things by your doctor to make sure that it's not going to make that worse. For people without any pre-existing medical conditions who are taking the amount that I'm recommending, I don't think that medically they would be considered to be an issue from what I've seen. But I know anecdotally there still could be. So if you're very, very sensitive, if you're the kind of person who reacts to a lot of things, then the fact that suddenly you have all this methylation capacity freed up may cause some changes in the body, which can initially be disconcerting. And I really can't be more specific in that. This varies massively in people. This also happens with other methyl donors. It happens to some people as well when they have high doses of methylated versions of the B vitamins, like methylcobalamin or the methylated form of folate, for instance, commonly. People can feel strange with them and stuff like that. So it is possible if you're highly sensitive. It obviously should be a concern if you are, suffering from any medical issues. But again, that's really high doses. As I said, like the amount that I'd recommend, 500 milligram to 1,000 milligram, you could find in a high animal food diet, which is fairly common throughout most of the world, throughout most of our history. So it's a pretty normal amount to have. They'll only cause a problem if you already have a problem.
Okay. So my understanding now, thank you for this. This is very, very helpful because I only thought creatine really was, okay, you want to put on some muscle, then great, let's go ahead and bring this in. So what I'm hearing is that also because it's really involved in methylation, that it can have a really good impact potentially on your clarity and on other aspects of potential detoxification or other processes that are turning things into other things. So it's got more uses than what we've just been hearing about.
Yeah, and turning things into other things is like the crux of all the biochemistry. So I know we weren't very specific at that, but just to say, the benefits can be extremely far-reaching, right? Because if one of your bottlenecks is that something is stuck not being transformed into the next step like it should be because of a lack of methylation capacity, the symptoms for that could be, like any one of a million. So yeah, the benefits of creatine are hard to predict. I would say that even though there are some cautions around it, it's generally considered to be one of the safest supplements out there, and very, very widely used. And I don't think that it's ever been fatal.
You mentioned choline along with creatine, so I'm going to go to that one next. So choline, heard a lot about it, but I don't know what it does. So please educate me.
So choline is fantastic to support the body's detoxification processes. And choline is fantastic as well to help a person to think more clearly, especially in the area of memory and recall, as opposed to more focus and quick thinking, which are slightly different processes, but especially to do with memory. So I am a big fan of choline. Choline shares this quality with creatine, which we talked about in the previous segment, of being one of the main things that your body makes with its methylation capacity. And so when you have more than enough choline coming in through your diet or coming in externally, let's say, then it frees your body up to be able to do all the other methylation stuff that it needs to do. Now, out of the two, I would say that choline is actually much more pressing to supplement than creatine in a lot of cases. This is because, creatine supplementation is often nice and helpful, but from what I've seen, choline supplementation is very often required for a person to have decent levels of health.
And why is that? Why choline over that?
Because there seems to be a variant where a person is not able to make it as well or as efficiently, and therefore
make the
they
choline
need
as well or as efficiently.
choline. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. To make the choline as well or as efficiently, and so they need quite a lot more. So they need 2 to 3 times as much in the diet. Now that's one factor, but the other factor that I think is probably more important is it's actually quite sparse in the diet. And this is a theme that you'll see of quite a few of the nutrients which I recommend. They're things that in the mainstream, they're treated as, it's fine, you'll get enough for your diet. But it's actually very, very easy, even for a person with a normal requirement, or let's say a typically low requirement, might not be getting an optimal amount from their diet. And so once you start needing 2 or 3 times as much, it's very easy to not be getting enough from the diet, especially if you eat a restrictive diet, which, many people who are trying to be healthy are. I would say that I got into big trouble creating a probably quite bad choline deficiency in myself by eating a diet that was, pretty much void of any, and then also not supplementing. And so
what kind of diet was that you were
very aware of the dangers. Simply no eggs, and no liver, and no nuts and seeds. And it's not particularly high or easy to get from nuts and seeds even, but it's at least there. But I wasn't having any of those things at all. Plus I have this genetic variant that means I need, double of what the average person needs. So I was creating quite a severe deficiency in myself. But this is actually really quite common. I think people are becoming more aware of it in the last 10 years as the genetic component has become more and more well known, maybe not mainstream, but kind of mainstream alternative. I see choline as a supplement getting a lot more popular. And as I said, I think absolutely rightly so.
So what does your body use choline for?
Yeah, so your body uses choline for, a vast number of processes. But the 2 areas where I see basically every cell of the body uses this type of choline called phosphatidylcholine, or phosphated choline, as part of the cell. The membrane of the cell. So it just like it uses cholesterol and just like it uses other things. So it's absolutely useful for every function in the body. But there's 2 areas where I specifically see that people who are choline deficient tend to suffer. And whether it shows up in you in one area or the other area or both will kind of depend on other factors, maybe lifestyle and especially genetic factors. But the 2 areas are liver stagnation or bile stagnation, and also memory. And so this is because of different forms of choline. So the phosphatidylcholine is what your body needs to keep the bile flowing out of your gallbladder into the digestive tract. When that doesn't happen, there are so many negative effects. We've done a whole episode on that about liver and toxic bile and cholestasis, which is the technical term for when the bile gets stuck and doesn't flow. It means that your body is not getting rid of toxins. It means your body's not digesting food properly, and therefore it's not absorbing nutrients properly. It means that organisms that are bad are more likely to proliferate if there's not enough bile flowing. And yeah, there's a huge amount of stuff that's bad about it, which we cover in detail in that episode. So all of that stuff can happen when your bile isn't flowing, and your bile can stop flowing just because you're lacking in choline. And suboptimal levels of choline are actually very, very common, mainly because it's not particularly ubiquitous in the diet. The other thing is memory. And so if your body acetylates the choline, that's called acetylcholine. And that is frequently called your memory molecule. It does other things. It's also related to, muscle contractions and stuff like that. All of these things have quite a vast application as to what they actually do, but it's mainly known as the memory molecule. And when you have a low level, that's probably like the first area that you'll notice. You're like, oh damn, what was I doing? What was it? Or, just like a blank. And so, that also happens as a result of other things like sleep deprivation, for instance, that we've talked about before, but, they're interrelated, right? So those would be the 2 areas. Of course, many people have both, right? They have stagnant toxic bile and digestive issues and all the rest of it, and they have memory issues. But as I said, in some people it may show up as more one than the other. I genetically seem to have a very strong memory. It's always like the one that I was highest.
Yes, you do.
in the different like measurements of focus and verbal dexterity and whatever. Memory was always used to be high anyway. So
I've always admired that about you.
Well, thank you. I would say my memory actually really took a hit like 3 years ago. It's definitely not what it was when I had my issue with methylation. So I still noticed it. But of course, most people wouldn't because it's still... And so that may be the same for the other way around, right? Some people have very strong, robust livers. And no matter, they're going to have, digestion that's just fine and all the rest of it, even when they're quite choline deficient, and it might show up for them with a memory issue. So those are the two most important areas that it's easy to track that it's actually choline. That's the problem.
You mentioned a few forms. So I'm going to ask you, is there a best form to take?
Yeah, so it depends what purpose. I would say once you realize that you have been choline deficient for a while, if you're in that position I was in, that's common because there are a lot of people who have that genetic variant. I think it's about 30% who have that variant where they need more. And then there's a lot of people who have a suboptimal amount of choline in their diet. So I'd say it's pretty common. So if you're in that position, I prefer to come at it from like all angles, or let's just say both angles. So you can get choline just in a kind of standard form, I guess, where it's bound to something fairly inert. And so for that, I've seen choline citrate, and I've seen some experts say that that's their favorite way of doing it, because then your body can make out of it what it will. Like it's the most, undifferentiated version, let's just say. Now, if you want to support your liver, though, my preference would be to go directly for phosphatidylcholine, which is the type that will help with the liver. Some people have an issue with this. They think it will feed TMAO, which is this bad substance created in the gut if you feed certain bacteria too much. I might be inclined to agree with that, which is why I like to go for a sublingual version of phosphatidylcholine, so that it's actually absorbed through the membranes of the mouth straight into the bloodstream, rather than having it go for the digestive tract, and maybe a liposomal version. So I hear the complaint about phosphatidylcholine that it could create a problem in your digestive tract, so that's why I like the sublingual liposomal, so it bypasses that particular issue. There is also an issue of what it's made from. Phosphatidylcholine is almost always made from soy or sunflower. And so there are issues with soy. It tends to be genetically modified. Soy is not great for you. It tends to have chemicals. So the sunflower seed form is generally the type that you would go for. But there could be exceptions to that. Technically, if it has been processed to a very high standards, there should be no traces of soy left other than the choline, right? You're supposed to be isolating a pure compound, but it really depends how much you trust that lab and that company to genuinely do that, or how much you think there might be residue of other bad stuff still in there. So in theory there should be no difference, but in reality I would go for sunflower version whenever you can.
And when somebody's looking on the label, is there a distinction of how those are stated?
I think in the US, certainly in the UK and the EU, it will say what it's made out of in the vast majority of cases. I don't know if they have to or if they have just got in the habit of doing it, but you can always ask the company and they'll tell you. If they're not saying it, it's almost certainly going to be soy because it's cheaper. But sunflower is not exactly hard to come by these days. There's quite a few companies that do it. So the other form of choline, what about if you want to support the brain, right? So the two forms that are usually recommended for that are alpha GPC or citicholine. So these are different forms of choline which are more likely to cross the blood-brain barrier and for your body to easily convert into acetylcholine. The alpha GPC that I've tried always tastes a little bit like a clumpy icing sugar. So if you have someone who's kind of resistant to supplements in general but has a sweet tooth, you can definitely give them like, a quarter of a teaspoon or something, and they go, that's nice. Like there's very little that's objectionable about it. Or of course, I guess you could add it to their food, sweet food, with their permission, and they probably wouldn't, be able to taste that it's there. So that's kind of handy, right? Because a lot of supplements, if you open the capsule, if you taste it raw, it tastes kind of rough to various degrees. But I believe the citicoline has got better science behind it, that it's supportive of the creating acetylcholine. So if I had to choose, I would probably go for that one.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I've found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code REJUVENATE. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code REJUVENATE for 20% off today. The citicoline over the alpha GPC. Okay. And so you've talked about these different forms now, and I heard you talking about, it sounded either liquid or powder. Is there one that's more beneficial over capsules, or will they all do the same thing? I know you talked about it hitting the digestive tract, especially for the phosphatidylcholine, but I wasn't sure if there's a preference for these others.
Yeah, I think with these, my preference in either case would be sublingual. So if it's phosphatidylcholine, I'd like a liposomal sublingual one, so it goes straight into the bloodstream that way. And then also, I would say with the choline, I mentioned opening up the capsule if it's a capsule rather than having a capsule. Again, I think there is a benefit to that. So yeah, I do lean to that. You're right, I hadn't really thought about that, but I think it's probably because of the research that shows that choline can be a problem if you eat a lot of it and it goes into your intestines. So maybe for that reason, I definitely do prefer the sublingual delivery method. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and the sublingual, that's just going to be open up the capsule, put it into powder, into like a water, and drink it that way. Like give it time to be absorbed through the mouth. No, you're talking about something in a capsule liquid form.
No. Sublingual means, so lingual is like language. It means mouth, and so sublingual means to go in via the mouth. So you just put it in your mouth and you don't swallow it until it dissolves. That's basically it. So maybe that's what you meant, but thinking you said adding it to water, you don't want to do that because then you're swallowing it. You just want to spray it in your mouth, put the dropper in your mouth, put the powder in your mouth, whatever it is, and then just hold it for a few minutes.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Now, with this, you did mention about how it can sometimes react with certain organisms that are already in our digestive tract. Are there any other safety concerns with choline?
You can overdo it with choline. If you do, apparently one of the side effects is to have kind of like a rotting fish kind of smell eventually. So this is something that I think that the usual recommended amount is something like 400 milligrams a day. If you're one of those people who has a higher need, it's maybe 800 or even 1,200 milligrams a day. I believe that the maximum dose you want to have is about 2.5 grams, so 2,500 milligrams a day. So it's not a huge amount more. It's one of those things where the difference between enough and too much is not a huge difference. But I would say it's much harder to overdose because, let's say in the case of, iron or zinc, you could have like 10 times as much as you should have in one capsule, which would be a problem. But, in the case of choline, you'd kind of have to take 10 capsules to have too much. So, especially if you do it the way I said, sublingually, you'd be holding choline in your mouth half a day to overdo it. So, yeah, in theory, you definitely can overdo it if you have too much. But I would say, because you have to take quite a lot, a volume to have too much. I don't think it's very common, although I remember reading like a couple of hospital reports of people who had really overdone it. So it can happen, but it's exceedingly rare. So yeah, just don't go over, like the maximum recommended 1,200 milligrams. Let's just say if you're the kind of type who needs it most and you've been deficient for a long time. I don't think there's any evidence of having much more of that. Like your body will be able to absorb it anyway. There's a limit to it. So, for most people, around 1,000 milligrams a day is going to be plenty.
And for those dosages, will that be across the board for all the types of choline that you mentioned, that 1,000 milligrams?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess it's a little bit complicated. It's like the choline without the thing attached. So I don't suppose on the label they usually give like an elemental choline. They do if it's choline citrate. No, actually they do quite often. Yeah, like the phosphatidylcholine. They tell you how much actual choline is in there. So I think they actually do. If there's any form that doesn't and you can't work it out, let me know in the comments and I'll tell you how to convert it.
Well, it sounds like choline is pretty much a powerhouse, especially in many areas for the liver, for the memory, things like that. So if somebody is suffering in any of those areas, they should definitely add this beautiful essential nutrient to their program. Phosphatidylserine, that was something that you recommended for me. So can you tell me why you recommended it for me?
Oh yeah. So phosphatidylserine, the reason why I see it recommended most commonly is to lower cortisol, which it's actually quite powerful at. Now, before, the beginning of my career, I saw it more commonly sold as a brain booster. It used to be included in neurotropic formulas. I think it still has some validity for that, but I think its ability to kill cortisol or stress has really taken over as the main reason why people would use it, because that's obviously such a huge thing. The thing that has in common with choline, which we've talked about previously, is that they're both found in lecithin. So lecithin is an extract usually from soy, and it can also be from sunflower seeds, which is an emulsifier. And so it's actually also very commonly used in foods. An emulsifier means it binds together fat and water, which otherwise tend to separate, right? So it's very useful in all kinds of culinary applications for that reason. But lecithin also contains phosphatidylcholine, which we've talked about, and phosphatidylserine. So serine is actually an amino acid, so it's a little bit different from choline, which is phosphated. But yeah, as I said, its ability to reduce cortisol is the reason why I'd recommend it to people these days.
How does phosphatidylserine reduce cortisol?
Yeah, so I'm not sure why. The two theories that I've seen are that it reduces the activity of the HPA axis, so the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, so it kind of stops it at its root. And the other explanation I've seen is kind of the opposite end of the scale, which is once the cortisol is already released and floating around, it blocks it from being able to go into the receptor as easily. So you only feel a neurochemical if it actually activates your receptor, not if it's just present in your bloodstream. So those are two theories I've seen. I don't actually know for sure, and it seems from the research I've seen it's something that they're still trying to work out. It may be all those things in more. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems to do it in a pretty harmless way. I guess that's the main thing. Whereas other things that, block receptors and stuff like that in any significant way often cause a whole cascade of side effects and other issues, which you just don't see with phosphatidylserine, often shortened to PS, we can call it that.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that the phosphatidylserine looks at besides cortisol?
Yeah, memory function, as I said, or brain function, that's the other big thing that it used to be sold as. But I think, again, the evidence for that was fairly sparse and not super compelling. I mean, there's an argument to be made that a lot of the time with these compounds, it starts off as a thing that they have, and then they try and work out what to do with it. And I think in the case of choline, that may well, phosphatidylserine and phosphatidylcholine as well, that may well be the case that, it's a byproduct of the soybean industry, which is one of the biggest in the world, and they were just trying to work out how to sell all these different things. But the evidence for phosphatidylserine blocking cortisol is pretty good, even if they don't understand the action very well. And I personally have found it's pretty effective. You often just need quite a lot of it for it to really work.
Are you able to get this in foods by any chance?
Yeah, absolutely. So anything that includes lecithin, which is not a lot, as we've talked about. So there's definitely some in liver, there's some in egg yolk, there's some in some of the nuts and seeds, and there's some in soy. There's quite a lot in soy. But generally, unless you're eating those specific foods I just said, you're probably going to be getting very little. But it's not an essential nutrient, and I don't think it's really even classed as conditionally essential. So meaning your body absolutely can make its own. Your body gets plenty of phosphate from the diet. It's in all foods, especially animal foods, also nuts, seeds, grains. And your body gets plenty of serine. It's one of the amino acids, and your body can make it out of one of the 8 essential amino acids. So there's no part of phosphatidylserine that your body, is necessarily likely to become deficient in. It's more useful. I talked about this in the introduction. Some of the nutrients, it's not that you necessarily need more, but it's that taking more than you would normally have can have a beneficial effect. So phosphatidylserine, I would say, would be in that category, that taking a significant amount will, one way or another, really stop that stress response in its tracks and calm you down.
Are there different forms of phosphatidylserine, or is there a best form of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess you could say food form, although to be honest, most of the foods I listed, I wouldn't want to eat. I wouldn't want to have liver or egg yolks because of the vitamin A. I wouldn't really want to have soy because of the thyroid suppressing effects and estrogenic effects. I wouldn't want to have nuts and seeds, except for macadamia because of the high levels of omega-6 fats. So, yeah.
You just kind of wiped out a whole list of things there.
So not really. If I want to boost my PS because I want to reduce my cortisol, I'm going to supplement. That's my strategy.
When somebody's going to look for that supplement, essentially, it's just really going to say phosphatidylserine. It's not going to be like magnesium, where there's so many different forms of that magnesium.
Yeah, so you could say that serine is the form and phosphatidyl is like the version of it. So it's already in a version, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, yeah.
I would say, just like I said about phosphatidylcholine, tends to come either from soy or sunflower seed. And I would recommend getting the sunflower seed derived version for added safety.
And what kind of dose is somebody going to look at when they are taking phosphatidylserine?
So that's a good question. The amount that used to be included in nootropic formulas used to be quite low, 50 grams, 100 grams, maybe 200 grams. The amount that you really need to stop cortisol in its tracks will vary from person to person, but you may want to be prepared to have more than that. So you may start, 200 grams, still feel stressed, still can't get to sleep or whatever, maybe a 400 grams, 600 grams, even 800 grams. The idea with phosphatidylserine is it will work, but you need to reach a certain level for it to work. And phosphatidylserine, because it's one of the smaller parts of lecithin, it used to be quite expensive compared to phosphatidylcholine, but these days it doesn't seem to be. I think you can get it reasonably priced, so it is possible to have those kind of larger doses without breaking the bank.
And are there any kind of safety concerns with taking phosphatidylserine?
I've not seen any. I also would not have more than 1,000 milligrams at once. And I also wouldn't have almost 1,000 milligrams every day for a long time. But from what I've seen, your body can pretty harmlessly break it down and remove it from your body. Serine is just an amino acid, which your body can also, always turn into other amino acids. So to me, it actually seems like it's safer than choline. It's got less chance of side effects than choline. But I still wouldn't have too much just because, the amount that you're going to get from your diet, as I explained earlier, is probably very low, right? It's going to be less than 50 milligrams. It may even be 10 milligrams or something like that. So if you start taking 1,000 milligrams, 100 times as much you get from diet, maybe once, that might be okay if you're really stressed, right? But doing that on an ongoing basis, it's just not natural. And I've not seen the evidence that it's very beneficial. When I say that this cuts out cortisol, I would say that it does. But of course, this should be a temporary thing until you work more on the source of it. I would not say this is something you want to have every day for years, even though there's no evidence that I've seen that proves it's a bad idea to have such high doses over a long period. I wouldn't do it just because, I don't think there's been enough studies to show that it is safe either.
So essentially, if somebody's having a lot of trouble sleeping, potentially due to too much stress, too much cortisol, then phosphatidylserine is a way to help that individual manage that cortisol to help them get to sleep and support their sleep, correct?
100%. And I would say it's safer than a lot of other cortisol blockers in the sense of not having unexpected side effects, not leaving you feeling groggy the next day like a large dose of melatonin might do. So I think it's a pretty good solution in those cases.
And this would be something that you would just take at night?
Probably because, you do need cortisol, especially, your body raises it in the morning on purpose. It starts off your circadian rhythm. It gives you energy. It gives you clarity and focus and that kind of thing. So yeah, the time you want to be blocking cortisol is really maybe not just before you sleep, but certainly not when you then have to go out and drive or, do stuff. Maybe it's, the evening before dinner or something at the earliest.
Lithium. I always thought this was a drug, not something that we would supplement with.
So lithium is in high doses, like 500 to 1,000 milligrams, is absolutely used as a drug for people with bipolar disorder. However, there is evidence showing that areas with the lowest level of lithium in their drinking water, and most people consume their lithium mainly from water, have double the rate of violence and suicides as the areas with the lowest level of lithium in their drinking water. And there's been studies done in areas as far apart as Texas, areas in Europe and Japan. And there was a commonality between all of them where this was found to be the case. So I've heard a few different theories about why this might be the case, but here's the interesting thing about lithium. It seems to suppress the extremes of emotion. And so obviously someone with bipolar disorder, their whole life is extremes of emotion, right? That's the whole point. That's why it used to be called manic depressive, right? They're either really up or really down. And so giving a very large amount, 500 to 1,000 milligrams of lithium, which is probably more than you would find in drinking water over the course of a year to 10 years in one day, will really suppress the extremes of the emotion. However, that's such a large amount, it also suppresses the thyroid, it can create kidney damage. It's seriously dangerous. If you are taking it because you're on bipolar, I'm not saying to not take it. It's worth it because, what's even more seriously dangerous is how you potentially behave when you're in a bipolar episode. But I know it's not, ideally, even some psychiatrists don't use it and, use an alternative, even though it's just a natural mineral for that reason, because it is quite damaging potentially. Now, the type of lithium that I'm talking about as being beneficial is something like 1 to 5 milligrams a day. So maybe 1,000th to 100th of what a bipolar patient is getting, which is not very much, but it is roughly the amount found in kind of natural sources of drinking water when they're in higher concentrations. So let's say, you drank from a spring, maybe, or a well, maybe in one area, the lithium would be quite high. The other area, lithium would be quite low. Where the lithium's quite low, you tend to have extremes of emotion. Some of the most extreme emotions are, murderous rage and suicide, or despair and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think that's why there is that correlation that it reduces violence and suicide. So that's one theory. Another theory that I've heard is that it actually binds to serotonin. And this goes back to blaming serotonin for a lot of extremes of emotion, which we have talked about before in previous episodes. So I won't revisit it all again. But in a nutshell, there's this idea that actually serotonin is not the happiness neurotransmitter that was originally believed. And of course, one of the famous side effects of SSRIs is violence and suicide. These are both possible and pretty sure they're usually written on the box. So why is that? Now, SSRIs do help some people. And I believe, in some people, it blocks some of the serotonin receptors and it increases something called allopregnanolone in the brain, which we've also talked about before, which is a very beneficial anti-anxiety natural hormone. But it's not consistent, right? And some people it makes them much worse. Now, when people take SSRIs, one of the things that they talk about often is, feeling more flat, right? Which again,
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it can kind of go both ways. That's for some people, but for some people, it produces the extremes of emotion, as we just talked about, right? So it kind of varies. But anyway, I like lithium. I don't know if it's because it has that effect of binding serotonin. I've seen some papers that indicate that, but it's fairly sparse because the whole serotonin might not be a good thing is newish in the scientific literature, though there's plenty of papers about it these days. So I would say having large amounts of lithium is a bad idea, but I have seen it be very effective for anxiety. I've seen it be very effective for maybe not depression in the sense of, life is pointless, that kind of thing, but just kind of more like feeling really sad, for instance, like basically for extremes of emotion. Now, you could say, well, isn't that a bad thing, Elwin? We're meant to feel emotions. What is suppressing them a good thing? And that's a valid point. I've talked about in previous episodes how we don't want to suppress emotions. We want to be aware of them and let them pass through us. However, this all depends on the context. Most people, if they have a strong, painful emotion, they're not like being present to it and letting it pass through them. They're shouting at someone or beating themselves up or going on a drinking binge or whatever, right? They're acting in some way, they're reacting in some way to feel better and often doing damage to themselves and others. So in comparison to that, I would say lithium is actually very beneficial. And the other thing is, as I said, until relatively recently, we would have some lithium in our water, and therefore we'd also have some lithium in our food, right? We talk a lot about how with modern agricultural methods, our food is lower in vitamins, it's lower in, nutrients which help a plant be healthy but don't help it grow, like zinc, like copper, like whatever, all the stuff we've talked about before, selenium, etc. But what about if lithium is one of them? So it could well be that we have a lithium deficiency in the same way that a lot of people have a zinc deficiency unless they supplement, and a selenium deficiency unless they supplement or unless they happen to be from a specific area that has high levels still in the soil, which is less and less common. And so I think something like that with lithium is very possible, because while obviously we don't want to like numb ourselves out and not feel any extremes of emotion, we also don't want to be so in the grip of emotion that it feels completely justifiable to kill someone or to kill ourselves, right? And so I would say a little bit of lithium may actually be really, really, really great for that. And again, as with so many things I recommended for stress, you do want to get to the root issue. But when you're in the grip of stress, getting to the root issue of anything is very difficult. People just tend to go round and round in circles, not getting anywhere, overthinking, but kind of not staying on a kind of reactive surface level, not thinking very deeply. So to do something to just calm down the extreme emotions so that you can work out what's really going on and resolve it, I think is really, really beneficial. And as I said, there's an argument to be made that our ancestors maybe had 0.5 milligram a day on average from their food and water and had that their whole lives, whereas we may have had 0 for decades. And so to have a little bit of a top up, there's an argument that that might actually be a natural and healthy thing.
Can you get lithium from your food? I mean, you just mentioned it, but if that is the case, gosh, which kind of foods?
Well, unfortunately, it's something like selenium where it's nothing to do with the food and everything to do with the soil. And in this case, the water that's being fed to them. So there's not a lot in food. You're going to get more from water, but some of it will still be absorbed by the plant, for instance, and go into the plant, and some of it will be absorbed from the plant into the animal. But yeah, it's going to be mainly from water that you get it from in the natural world. And that just depends, right? And when you get the mineral water bottle, it'll often tell you how much calcium or magnesium is in there. I don't think it very rarely tells you how much lithium is in there.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just need to take a moment to quickly tell you about a way that you can support the podcast by getting high quality, affordable supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is they have great quality products with minimal fillers, but the prices are very affordable. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're really helpful and friendly. And what I love most of all is the amazing descriptions Elwin's written for each product category about that topic. There's so much information and education on it. I've actually learned more from reading their product descriptions than I have from most articles. So, to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, you can use promo code RejuvenateMe for a 20% discount off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order with promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting because I, to be honest, I would, and forgive my ignorance, I would have just been scared of lithium, not realizing, oh no, it's just something that's naturally occurring anyway. It's not, it's part of this world that you are taking in.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I would class it as an essential nutrient, an essential mineral, as much as magnesium, but probably not in that category as it's a more minor one. But, like molybdenum, like zinc, like copper, like selenium, I would put it in one of those. Mm-hmm. And I would say emotions that are so extreme they turn violent, I would see as a side effect of lithium deficiency. It's not not a common one because it's something that's psychological, so-called, rather than physical. But this whole thing about the brain being separate from the body is nonsense, right? The brain is just part of the body. But because of the way that, things developed in the late 19th century with psychiatry and medicine being separate branches, it's kind of stayed that way for whatever reason, largely. But there are many psychological side effects for other nutrients that we've talked about, but they're often not primary, right? Whereas I think the primary one for lithium is psychological, and that's why it hasn't really been recognized.
What's the best form of lithium?
So if you can obviously get it from your spring water that has high levels of it, that's great. I say it's rare. It may not show up in the bottle, but there may well be people who have tested it, just like those research studies I talked about, like with different areas where they tested all the water. So you may be able to find that out. And of course you can pay for your own test. So all of that's possible. Supplement wise, the only form I think I've seen is lithium orotate. That's the type that you always see. So this is just, a fairly cheap and simple way, and I'd say harmless way of binding a mineral. That's totally fine. So I'm totally happy with having lithium orotate. And usually the doses that I've seen sold are 1 milligram, 3 milligram, or 5 milligram. I would say a kind of a maintenance dose. If you realize that you want to be maybe a little bit less extreme in your emotions, but otherwise you're fine, would be like 1 milligram a day. Whereas let's say if you're in the grip of a panic attack or anxiety or really not feeling good, you might want to go for 5 milligrams at a time. And, I think I first heard of lithium over 10 years ago, but the person who got me interested in it again was Dr. Ben Lynch. And he talked about, basically recommending it to people as and when they need it as a very effective way of combating anxiety. Okay, you're in the grip of anxiety, take this, you'll feel better after X amount of minutes. One of those kind of very therapeutic tools.
And so with this, we discussed it in the high doses that there are those potential feelings. Are there safety concerns with lithium?
Absolutely, if you have too much. But I have not seen any safety concerns with 1 milligram. I've not actually even seen any with 5. But I would say 1 is, very safe and closer to what we might have had naturally if we happen to live in a location where it was naturally higher in the water.
So with lithium, it's nothing to be scared of, as I would have, because to be honest, if I'd seen that, I was like, oh my God, why would somebody take that? But this has been really educational because it's going to be very supportive of people that are going to have, or that are potentially in the throes of an anxiety attack or having extreme emotions. This can potentially really help to level them out.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Forgive me if I get it wrong. Molybdenum. I can't even say it. You're going to have to correct me. So tell me, I didn't even know I needed this.
Well, a lot of minerals like zinc and magnesium, they're essential for like hundreds or maybe even over 1,000 enzymatic reactions in the body. Molybdenum is only really understood to be essential for one, and yet it is one that is very important. And it's the conversion of sulfite to sulfate. And so let's start at the beginning. So sulfur is an element in the same way that, you know, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, etc. are an element, right? But there is different forms of it. Now, the type that's like the worst form that you're least going to want to have is sulfites. And sulfites are often used as preservatives for dry fruit, for instance, commonly, for wine.
Yes, I was going to say, you see that a lot in the back of the packages. Yeah.
And often, at least in this country, in the UK, you see it like in bold and then it's marked as like an allergen because some people have an allergy to it. So your body often has this kind of unpleasant tendency to turn something into something more poisonous before it turns it into something either less poisonous or even something beneficial. And this is the case for sulfur. So your body will turn it into sulfite before it ultimately turns it into what it really needs, which is sulfate. And so molybdenum helps in that process of converting it into sulfate. So that's one of the reasons why it's used and recommended for people who have issues with allergies with sulfites, to make sure that it doesn't build up in their blood and, not build up in the blood, to make sure it doesn't build up in their body, so that they convert it as quickly as possible into something that they're not going to have a reaction to. So that's one reason. Because sulfate is considered to be, you know, a very important part of the detoxification process, high doses of molybdenum are often used by people who are seeking to detoxify as well. So for me, with these I've been talking about why I do it. So the reason I like it is for the first reason. I don't like having high levels of sulfites in my body. I feel like I feel it. And so molybdenum is really good to stop that happening.
Well, let me ask you, when you say you feel it, what are you feeling?
It's like a slight allergy. It's like my eyes feel like prickly and red. I have like a pressure feeling in my sinuses. Sometimes it's a little bit feeling in my throat as well. It's like a mild allergic reaction. Obviously, for some people, it's not mild. It's very serious. The other thing about molybdenum, the other reason why people use it, is it does compete with iron, zinc, and copper, but especially copper. And so molybdenum can be a really beneficial thing to take if you're suffering from copper toxicity. So copper toxicity, some people, including I know some people who follow this channel, believe very strongly that copper toxicity is very widespread and very, underreported. I'm not sure that they're wrong. That may well be the case. I have personally tested myself and seen that I have low levels of copper in my blood and low levels in my hair. So this is not something that I'm concerned with, but I do believe it is potentially an issue, especially I would say again among people who eat a more plant-based diet. So a more animal-based diet tends to be high zinc, low copper, except for liver and some of the organs, which are very high copper. But a animal flesh, meat kind of diet, meat, cheese, eggs diet, is going to be high in zinc, low in copper. A plant-based diet, especially with a lot of legumes and nuts and seeds, which are often where you get your filling food from and your protein on a plant-based diet, they're going to be high in copper instead. So whether there is really an epidemic of copper toxicity even among people who have never eaten a plant-based diet, I'm not sure about that. Obviously, there are other reasons you might be copper toxic. There could be copper because you have copper building up, and you have copper pipes. Maybe because you're using copper utensils. Maybe because you're wearing copper jewelry, stuff like that. So there are other reasons why over time you may build up a copper toxicity. And bottom line is, who knows? There are also some people who need less copper than others. So there could be a genetic reason why you would have a buildup of copper. And yes, if you have a buildup of copper in your body, it is highly toxic. It is highly dangerous. And one of the kind of medical diagnosis for high copper is a very interesting one. It's Wilson's disease. And the symptoms of Wilson's disease, I mean, the most interesting one is that you become a psychopath. Oh, so literally you lose any sense of conscience, any guilt, shame, most fear, become highly impulsive, highly predatory. All that stuff can happen just as a result of excess copper, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. One of the diagnostic tools that people with that Wilson's disease, like that level of copper toxicity, will have like this copper ring in their eyes. So this is something that you can potentially see eventually, but usually it takes a long, it's not easy to get to that point. So the much more common thing would be subclinical. So not enough that it's causing a medical issue, but enough that it's causing an issue. When you have high levels of copper, you can have low levels of zinc, you can have low levels of iron because they're antagonistic to each other. Well, correction, sorry. When you have too high copper, you'll have low levels of the other ones. So again, molybdenum would be one of the best ways of dealing with that copper toxicity.
So it's working with just detoxification in general, correct?
It's working with detoxification in general, in the sense that it helps your body turn sulfite into sulfate, and sulfate supports detoxification in general. And then it's specifically helping to detoxify copper if that's necessary. And that's an important point. See, I have to be careful not to do high dose of molybdenum because my copper is already low. I know there are a very few people out there who follow me who believe that copper is not an essential nutrient, who would disagree with that, which is fair enough. But I'm quite happy to keep copper on the low end of the range that's considered healthy as a compromise. So I need to make sure I don't have too much molybdenum because I don't want my copper to go too low.
Is there a best form of molybdenum to take?
So the two types that I've seen are usually available, either citrate or like an amino acid chelate, usually like a glycinate. Generally, glycinate is considered better absorbed than citrate for most minerals, but I actually haven't seen any research indicating that necessarily. So I think either form would be just fine. Maybe, if they're the same price, availability, etc., maybe go for glycinate because it is better in some cases.
Okay. Can people find molybdenum in their food? Yeah.
So molybdenum is something that, again, unless you eat a particular food group, is quite hard to get enough of. Now, in today's recording, I've picked a lot on the plant-based people, but actually it would be the animal-based people who would be most likely to be deficient in molybdenum because it really is highest specifically in pulses, otherwise known as beans, beans, lentils, chickpeas, stuff like that. So for people who never eat pulses, which I know is quite a few people, maybe who do have too much copper and stuff like that, I can see how it is easy to potentially have a molybdenum deficiency because, if you don't eat those foods, which a lot of people don't, they don't agree with a lot of people. They're full of lectins, they're full of fibers, which often feed not good bacteria in the gut with people who are not super healthy in their gut. They contain phytates, which block your absorption of other minerals. So I can basically see that a lot of people argue with me, I don't want to eat pulses, and have some good reasons for it. But I'm just saying, when you don't, then you often will not have a large amount of molybdenum in your diet. You'll have a small amount.
And what kind of dosages is somebody looking at when they want to supplement with molybdenum?
So I've seen anything from 25 microgram to 1,000 microgram. So there are people who kind of advocate doing a sulfite detox. And they talk about doing very high doses, something like 1,000 milligrams. There are also people who talk about doing a copper detox, as I've talked about, and they often advocate for high doses as well, though I think not necessarily that high. The amount that you're usually going to get from a normal diet might be like 25 to 50 micrograms. But as we said, if you have a more restricted diet, maybe then you might even have a lot less than that. So I would say that if you just want to support health, like let's say you're putting together a multi for yourself and you just want to make sure you're getting enough, then probably supplementing with 50 micrograms would be plenty. If you want to deal with like a backlog, then you're going to want to go for higher doses. But you're probably going to want to do that overseen by some practitioner to make sure that you know what you're doing. I would not recommend more than 1,000 micrograms a day. I think I've seen, I have seen studies of people who have overdosed. I can't remember what it was. It was at least 5,000 micrograms a day. It may have been more, and having kind of various kind of symptoms. I don't know if they ever decided what it was that caused it, because there's literally only 1 or 2 cases ever. But it may be because it just detoxified too much copper, and then the person ends up copper deficient. I'm not sure. It may be because it moved too much sulfur and that created some kind of process. I'm not sure exactly why. But yeah, I would be wary of having too much of molybdenum, just like I'd be wary of having too much iron, too much copper, or too much zinc, because they're all antagonistic to each other.
And then are there safety concerns with molybdenum?
Yeah, just, like I discussed, in very high doses, but in the doses found in food, or, having like 50 to 100 micrograms a day, I would say no.
Perfect. So somebody that is really looking to help their detoxification pathways, specifically through through sulfation and helping the body that way, or somebody that has issues with copper, this could be a very good essential nutrient that they want to add into their program, right?
Absolutely. And for people wondering, well, this sounds so niche, Elwin, why are you including it in a list of underrated nutrients? It's because I think even if you're not in either of those 2 positions, it's so common when you're trying to eat healthily, whether it's paleo or, whatever, to never have high molybdenum foods that you can easily end up still with low levels. And so I would just recommend most people to make sure you have at least a little bit, whether on its own or in a multi or something like that, because you probably aren't getting optimal amounts otherwise.
Let me ask you this, because alcohol is a massive, massive product that a lot of people are ingesting. So would it make sense that people are looking to up their molybdenum?
Absolutely. And that is one of the reasons why people do use high doses, is to balance, alcohol toxicity. Good question.
So next, glycine. Tell me, I really know that it's in the detox pathway, but I don't know what it does.
So glycine does a lot of stuff, but the reason why I love it and I recommend it frequently is for its calming neurotransmitter capacity. So it does in many ways the same thing as GABA. And we've talked about GABA before in previous episodes. So we said, in a nutshell, feeling great, feeling in a flow state is dependent on good levels of 3 things. Number 1, ATP. Your mitochondrial cells have to be able to create enough energy. Number 2, dopamine. That's the thing that gives you motivation. Otherwise, you might be perfectly happy, but you'll be perfectly happy while being still and doing nothing. So dopamine will make you do positive stuff. But then finally, if you just have dopamine, then you're going to be very motivated, but you're also going to be constantly stressed and frustrated and impatient. You need something to make you calm, relaxed, centered, at peace, being able to just enjoy life, enjoy the world, etc. And that's GABA. And so glycine is considered as a building block of GABA, and it's also something which can function as GABA can. So even if your body doesn't convert it into GABA, it still has calming, or what they call an inhibiting neurochemical effects. When they say inhibiting, let me just explain that. So they refer to it as an inhibitory neurotransmitter, but what is it inhibiting? It's inhibiting stress. So I understand why they use the word inhibiting, but I would say it's more maybe balancing rather than inhibiting. It's actually just bringing you back to a more calm, centered place. But because it slows you down, I guess they would consider it to be inhibiting. If you have an excess of GABA, it will slow you down too much. So things that stimulate the release of too much GABA would be things like Xanax and Valium and stuff like that, which, if you take, as well as alcohol, and famously, if you combine those, right, if you have like Xanax with alcohol or something like that, it's dangerous because of just how much it'll slow you down.
Those are more like, looking at it, they're sedatives essentially. So, and that's really just going to kind of put you out, really.
Yeah. So sedative kind of means either stress chemical reducing or GABA increasing. That would be the simple way of looking at it. So yes, I mean, too much calming and it's sedative, too much stimulation and it's kind of anxiety, paranoia, whatever, promoting, right? Like in the case of dopamine, when people take methamphetamine, I guess that's the other extreme. So you want this beautiful balance between dopamine and GABA. So dopamine is a stress chemical. Technically, it's largely made in the adrenal glands. and you do need that GABA to balance it out. So there's some other benefits to glycine, though. First of all, if you use it as a supplement, it's a sweet white powder that has basically no taste other than sweetness, and is 2/3 of the sweetness of sugar. So this is one of the easiest supplements to get people to take. You could just put a teaspoon in your hot drink instead of, sugar or honey or whatever you usually use. Not only is it, not sugar, it's not having any effect on your blood sugar. It's actually, helping to nourish your body. Now, the other thing that glycine is famous for is like building strong connective tissue. And in fact, that's where it's normally found when people have a high amount in food. It's usually found because they're eating bone broth, or because they're, having maybe cuts of meat with a lot of connective tissue that they're, making into a stew or something like that. It's the connective tissue that is very high in glycine. And this is also where the kind of cliche or stereotype comes from, that eating like a chicken soup or a bone broth or something like that will be both healing and also calming and relaxing. One of the reasons will be because of its high glycine content.
And is it just specifically in things like bone broth that we can find glycine, or are there any other forms of food?
It's in very high amounts in connective tissue, and therefore things like bone broth. But there is some in most foods. It's just, much less amounts. Connective tissue is really where you're going to get a large amounts. There's no plant foods that have anywhere near as high amounts. However, a plant-based person would say, well, it doesn't matter when glycine is a non-essential nutrient, meaning that your body can make it out of other amino acids. And this is absolutely true. You can make the argument that you can get all the glycine you need by having your 8 essential amino acids. That is the prevailing mainstream biochemical perspective. But I would make the argument that potentially, even though you can get enough to be okay from having your body make it from other protein sources, if you want to really help to calm yourself down, or if you want to really support the healing process in your body, then adding a big dose of extra glycine, either through a natural food source or a supplement, can be really beneficial in a kind of more medicinal almost, or therapeutic application, as opposed to addressing deficiency.
Okay. And then as well, there's always the genetic factor to take into consideration. If somebody may have issues with that being able to make it or create it itself. So there's always that to take into consideration as well.
Absolutely. That is 100% true. I've seen that where people do need more glycine. And I've also observed that those people tend to be more anxious. So it's not obviously a one-to-one correlation, but when your body struggles to make probably, one of the most important calming neurotransmitters in your body, it would make sense that it would have that impact. So that's one of the reasons that glycine is really on my list of, feeling younger nutrients. I guess that's the two key things. First of all, it'll help you look younger in the sense of the collagen and the connective tissue. Second of all, it will help you to be calmer, which will help you to live longer.
Oh, so then are there different forms?
So it depends if you like it from food. Like I say, any bone broth, any kind of connective tissue, basically. But as I said, the supplement is, very palatable to most people. It's not very expensive. It's easy to get. The side effect profile I haven't really seen. Like, you can have very high doses of it and it seems to be completely fine. Glycine, even though it's not one of the essential amino acids, it's the simplest of all the amino acids chemically. So your body can also turn glycine into other amino acids in turn. So even when you do have very large amounts, it seems to be totally fine and only beneficial from what I've seen.
And then with glycine, are there recommended doses?
Yeah, absolutely. So it could be any amount that you like, but if you want it to be enough that it's really going to calm you down, or if you want to be enough that it will noticeably kind of speed up your healing time, then you're probably going to want several grams at least, 2, 3, 4, 5 grams. And you may even want 10, 15 grams, that kind of amount. It's something that you can have quite a bulky amount of. Now it's quite dense. So what that means is if you buy, say, like a pound tub of glycine powder, which you can get pretty easily, you can get a teaspoon out, put a teaspoon in a drink or in, soup or whatever else you're making the supplement very easily. And so you can very easily get that much, basically. Whereas with some things, even some amino acids, it's actually very hard to get that much because in some cases it tastes bad, in some cases it clumps in liquid, in some cases it's very bulky. Like there's loads of reasons why taking amino acids can be problematic. So it's the least problematic of all the amino acids to take.
I mean, taking that kind of high dose, is that something that somebody would do for a limited period of time and then bring it back down?
They could, but I've seen people who, happily do and recommend doing something like 5 to 10 grams for a long period of time without any issue. So if you think about it, the amount of glycine that naturally exists in, connective tissue in like a bone broth is something like 15 to 20%. So let's say if our ancestors are eating a lot of connective tissue every day, and I say our ancestors, but, many places in the world, they still do, right? They cook the whole animal, not just the muscle. They're having a lot of connective tissue every day. You can easily get 5 to 10 grams a day just from let's call it, by Western price traditional diet, right? This is not that crazy. It's not that unusual. So because it's not that unusual in our diet, I don't think there's any issue doing it long-term supplementally either.
And then with this, I mean, it doesn't sound like there are with glycine. Are there any safety concerns?
Only in as much as, excess protein, there's a safety concern, right?
For the kidneys and things like that?
Potentially, yeah. And of course, just with all supplements, making sure you get it from a good source, making sure it's not coming with something, but assuming that it's pure. Yeah, very safe.
So if somebody is low on low on GABA, or if they're feeling overly anxious or things like that, then adding glycine to their diet, to their protocol to help be the building, because it is the building block for GABA, could be very, very beneficial to them in their life.
Yeah, it's a building block for GABA, but I think the most interesting thing is that it works, on its own as well as a complementary factor to GABA. Yeah, it's a great thing to have at night before sleep, I would say. One of the other benefits to it is it helps to keep the blood sugar balanced. I forgot to mention that.
Well, how does it do that?
I can't remember. I think it's to do with insulin sensitivity. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. But so it's often recommended to have it before sleep because not only will it help to calm you down, but it will also help to keep your blood sugar balanced during sleep, which if I remember correctly with the insulin, it's because it's going to stop that insulin spike that goes along with the stress that naturally you get at 3 or 4 in the morning to keep your blood sugar up, which then would cause a crash and up and down and all the rest of it. So if you can keep your blood sugar stable throughout the night, you're much more likely to be able to sleep for the night. So glycine, you can have it any time, just like obviously you can have bone broth any time of day, but it naturally makes most sense at the end of the day.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's a good little tip. I might have to try that one.
Have you not tried that one, Chrissy?
I haven't tried glycine right before bed. I've got the phosphatidylserine and the magnesium, but no, I haven't done the glycine right before bed. I mean, I take it during the day.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I do have it during the day.
I thought you had it. Yeah, cool.
Elwin, this has been fantastic. I know we're coming up for time, so we're going to have to stop here, and we will continue this conversation into a part 2 that'll be coming out very, very soon. Please remember to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you for part 2.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.